Deep in the Arizona woodlands, rancher Ethan Walker was riding home after sunset, his horse's hooves crunching softly over the fallen leaves. The fading light painted long shadows that swayed between the trees, making every small movement hard to ignore. When he spotted a faint rustle near the tree line, he assumed it was a deer. But as he guided his horse closer, something felt different, too still, too fragile. He climbed down, took a cautious step, and froze when he realized it wasn't an animal hiding there. It was a child, small, alone, and barely moving. Curled against a fallen log lay a tiny Apache boy, his skin pale from hunger and cold. His clothes were torn, his breathing shallow, and his body trembling as if trying desperately to hold on to life. Ethan's heart tightened. This wasn't just a lost child. This was someone who had been abandoned, or worse, forgotten. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle him, but the boy didn't even lift his head. He was too weak. Ethan knelt in the dirt beside him and gently touched his shoulder. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now," Ethan whispered, keeping his voice soft and steady. The boy didn't respond, but his trembling slowed, as if the sound of another human voice brought a faint sense of comfort. Ethan slipped off his thick ranch jacket and wrapped it around the child's fragile body. When he lifted him, it felt like holding a feather, far too light for a boy his age. That terrified Ethan even more. He carried him toward his horse, knowing time was running out. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than ever, though Ethan pushed his horse faster through the cooling night. The wind bit against his face, but he kept the child shielded against his chest. He whispered small reassurances along the way, not knowing if the boy could hear him. When the cabin finally came into view, a warm glow through the dark trees, Ethan felt a rush of relief. He hurried inside, kicking the door shut behind him, and gently laid the child on the sofa near the fireplace. He needed warmth, food, and rest, fast. Ethan grabbed blankets from the cabinet, wrapping the boy carefully and tucking them around him to trap the heat. Then he hurried to the stove, pouring water into a pot and stirring in broth he always kept ready for long workdays. The rich smell of warm soup filled the room as he watched the flames flicker beneath the pot. His worry grew with each passing second. How long had the boy been out there? Had anyone been searching for him? Why was he alone in such a dangerous place? When the soup was ready, Ethan lifted a spoonful and brought it to the boy's lips. At first, the child didn't react. But after a moment, he parted his lips just enough to accept a tiny sip. That small sign gave Ethan hope. Inch by inch, sip by sip, the boy took in the warmth. Ethan stayed close, encouraging him quietly, letting him know he wasn't alone anymore. The boy shivered less with each spoonful, though exhaustion still weighed heavily on his small face. Hours passed as Ethan monitored him. The fire crackled softly, casting a golden glow across the cabin walls. Every so often, Ethan adjusted the blankets, added more logs to the fire, or checked the child's pulse to reassure himself he was still fighting through. The boy's breathing grew steadier, though he never fully woke. Ethan sat beside the sofa, elbows resting on his knees, his thoughts drifting toward every possible explanation for the boy's condition. None of them were good. He wished he could do more than offer warmth and food. At some point, fatigue tugged at Ethan's eyes, but he refused to sleep. Not tonight. He watched the tiny chest rise and fall, counting each breath as if it were the most important thing in the world. Every time the boy stirred, Ethan leaned forward, hoping he might say something. But the child remained silent, trapped somewhere between exhaustion and survival. The night grew colder, but inside the cabin, Ethan kept the fire strong. Saving this child had become the only thing that mattered now. Just before dawn, something changed. The boy's eyelids fluttered, not with pain or fear, but with faint awareness. Ethan straightened immediately. He didn't speak, not wanting to overwhelm him. Instead, he waited patiently as the boy's eyes struggled to focus in the dim morning light. They opened slowly, dark, tired, but alive. For a brief moment, those eyes met Ethan's. There was confusion there, and fear, but also something else, something softer. A fragile spark of trust, barely formed but undeniably real. The boy tried to sit up, but his weak body wouldn't allow it. Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Easy, kid. You're all right. You're safe here." The child closed his eyes again, but this time not out of exhaustion. It felt more like surrendering to safety. Ethan gave him another sip of soup and gently brushed the hair away from his forehead. The boy didn't speak a word, yet Ethan sensed he was listening, processing, deciding if he could trust this stranger who had carried him from the dark woods into the warmth of a home. As the morning light brightened the room, the boy's breathing settled into a calm rhythm. Ethan finally allowed himself a long breath of relief. He didn't know who the child's family was or how far he had wandered. He didn't know if someone was looking for him or if he had escaped something far worse. But what he did know, what settled deeply into his chest, was that finding him wasn't an accident. Something had placed the child in his path for a reason Ethan couldn't yet understand. By noon, the boy was sleeping more peacefully, the tightness in his features slowly fading. Ethan used the quiet moments to boil water, wash his dishes, and prepare the cabin in case the child woke up scared or confused. He placed a small cup of water beside him, along with a soft towel and a few extra blankets. Every time he passed by, he paused just to make sure the boy was still breathing comfortably. The cabin, usually filled with silence, now carried a weight of responsibility Ethan hadn't expected but willingly accepted. Later in the day, when the boy stirred again, Ethan sat beside him and spoke gently, sharing simple things to ease his fear. He told him his name, spoke about the ranch, the horses, the quiet safety of the woods surrounding them. The boy didn't respond, but he watched Ethan with slow, thoughtful eyes. The fear was still there, shadowed beneath the surface, but something else flickered each time Ethan spoke, a fragile acknowledgement that this man was not a threat. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting warm orange light through the cabin windows, Ethan felt the tension of the long day beginning to ease. He handed the boy another spoonful of soup, which he accepted more willingly now. His small hands trembled as he reached for the cup of water, and Ethan helped him without hesitation. The boy looked up, studying Ethan's face with quiet curiosity. He was trying to understand why a stranger had saved him, why someone cared. The fire crackled softly behind them, filling the silence with warmth. Outside, the cool evening breeze rustled the leaves, but inside the cabin, peace finally settled. Ethan knew their journey was far from over. Tomorrow, he would need to seek answers, find out where the boy came from and why he had been alone. But tonight, this child was safe. This child was warm. And for the first time since Ethan had found him curled beside that fallen log, he saw something in the boy's expression that told him everything had changed. Trust. Tiny, fragile, but unmistakable trust. 4 days later, golden morning light filtered softly through the wooden cabin windows, warming the floorboards and casting gentle patterns on the walls. Ethan had barely slept over the last few nights, waking repeatedly to check on the child resting quietly beneath layers of blankets. The boy's strength was slowly returning, his breaths deeper, his skin warmer, his eyes less clouded with fear. That morning, as Ethan set a cup of coffee on the table and allowed himself a brief moment of calm, he felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if the quiet was about to break. Just as he lifted the mug to his lips, a thunderous sound tore through the peaceful cabin. Boom, boom, boom. The violent knocking shook the door on its hinges, causing Ethan to instinctively set the cup down and reach for the handle. His heart pounded, not out of fear for himself, but for the boy resting behind him. Whoever stood outside wasn't tapping lightly. They carried urgency, desperation, or possibly danger. Ethan took a steadying breath, braced himself, and pulled the door open. The sight before him made him freeze. Standing on his porch were 3 Apache women, their posture stiff with emotion. Their clothing was traditional, beautiful beadwork, woven patterns, and fabrics that carried generations of meaning. But what struck Ethan the most were their faces. They weren't angry. They weren't threatening. Instead, their expressions carried something far heavier: fear, exhaustion, and a fragile hope that trembled at the edge of breaking. One woman clutched a small woven pouch to her chest as if holding onto the last piece of strength she had. The eldest woman stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly as she touched her own chest with a trembling breath. Her eyes glistened, filled with days of worry and nights of searching. When she spoke, her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from anguish held far too long. "We were told our lost child might be here," she said softly. Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Ethan felt the cabin behind him, felt the boy's silent presence, as the pieces clicked together. Someone had seen Ethan carrying the child through the woods. Someone had run back to the Apache community with hope. Ethan stepped aside immediately, his voice gentle. "Come in," he said. He gestured inside the cabin, inviting them without hesitation. They hesitated for only a moment, exchanging quick glances, as if afraid to hope too soon. Then they stepped across the threshold, their footsteps cautious but desperate. The warmth of the cabin washed over them. Ethan guided them toward the sofa where the boy lay resting, unaware of the emotional storm gathering around him. When the women saw him, everything inside them seemed to break. The youngest woman pressed her hands to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. The middle-aged woman knelt instantly, touching the boy's cheek gently, as if afraid he might disappear if she pressed too hard. The eldest covered her heart with both hands, closing her eyes as relief overwhelmed her. Ethan watched quietly as the weight of their grief lifted, replaced by gratitude so deep it left the room trembling in silence. The boy stirred at the sound of their sobs. His eyes blinked open slowly, adjusting to the morning light. When he recognized the women, his expression shifted, first confusion, then relief, then something Ethan couldn't name. He reached a weak hand toward them, and the youngest woman grasped it with trembling fingers. She whispered something in Apache, her voice cracking with pure, raw emotion. The child's lips trembled, but he finally managed a faint smile, one filled with familiarity and love. The women turned to Ethan, their faces shining with gratitude. The eldest spoke again, her voice steadier now. We searched for him for days. We feared the worst, but you saved him. Ethan shook his head softly. He saved himself, he said humbly. I only helped. But to them, his kindness meant far more. They understood what surviving in the wilderness meant. They knew how close the boy had been to the edge. Without Ethan's intervention, this reunion might never have happened. The eldest woman approached Ethan slowly, respecting his space yet determined to express her heart. She placed a hand over her chest, a gesture of deep cultural gratitude. Our people will not forget this, she said, her eyes sincere. You gave him warmth, food, and life when the wild had nearly taken him. Ethan felt uncomfortable under such reverence, but he nodded respectfully. He had not helped the child for recognition. He had done it because it was simply the right thing to do. As they prepared to take the boy home, something unexpected happened. Instead of leaving immediately, the eldest woman invited Ethan to step outside with her. The air was cool, and the scent of pine drifted through the morning breeze. She looked toward the mountains in the distance, as if gathering strength from the land itself. Our community has been cautious with outsiders, she began. Our history has not been easy. But trust is built through actions, and yours has spoken louder than words. Ethan listened quietly, understanding the gravity of her words. She continued, if you allow it, we wish to show you our gratitude, not through gifts, but through connection. Through understanding. You protected one of our children. That makes you a friend. Ethan felt a sense of humility settle over him. He had always respected the Apache people, admired their traditions and resilience. But he had never expected to be welcomed, truly welcomed, into their space. I'd be honored, he replied honestly. When they returned inside, the boy was sitting up for the first time, supported by the two younger women. His eyes were brighter than before, his small hands gripping theirs with trust. The eldest woman placed a small beaded bracelet around his wrist, then turned to Ethan and carefully wrapped a second bracelet around his own. For protection, she said simply. For connection. Ethan accepted it, feeling the weight of its meaning settle warmly against his skin. As they prepared to leave, the boy looked at Ethan with a soft, lingering gaze. It wasn't just gratitude, it was a quiet promise. A bond had formed between them, born from fear and strengthened by compassion. Ethan knelt beside him and brushed the hair gently from his eyes. You take care, buddy, he whispered. The boy nodded faintly, his eyes shining with emotion. He pressed his small hand briefly against Ethan's, a gesture that needed no translation. The women carefully lifted the child into their arms, thanking Ethan one last time before stepping out onto the porch. The morning sun glowed over the landscape, illuminating the path ahead of them. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching as they walked toward the distant trail leading back to their community. Their figures grew smaller, but their presence lingered in his heart. He knew this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something deeper than he had expected. When the cabin finally grew quiet again, Ethan sat beside the fireplace, staring at the faint flicker of ashes. He replayed the morning's events in his mind, the knocking, the tears, the boy's smile, the bracelet now resting on his wrist. His life had changed in a matter of days. He had stepped into a chapter he never saw coming, one woven not from chance, but from destiny. And deep down, he knew his connection to the Apache community was only beginning. What
came next would not only surprise him, it would reshape his understanding of loyalty, trust, and the invisible threads that tie people together. Ethan had thought he was simply saving a child. But in truth, he had opened a door to a future intertwined with a community that had just begun to let him in.